Okay. Thanks. Welcome to the Advisory Design Panel meeting this Thursday, January 23rd. We'll start the meeting by acknowledging the meeting is being held on Squamish Nation traditional territory. Our first item is the adoption of the agenda. Farzin, and second, David. Okay, and then the second is minutes from December 12th. And adopting these minutes, I'm just going to open for comments in the beginning if anyone's had a look at the minutes and has any comments. I'm going to make a comment that the minutes were actually presented to council last meeting. We haven't adopted these minutes yet. I do have an item that I would like to have removed. And then everyone else can tell me whether they agree with it or not. There's an item that states here, concerns expressed regarding the liability to district for having living space under flood construction levels. So at that meeting, there was not a concern expressed. There was some discussion on it, but it was not a concern. So I'm not sure how that wording got in there, or it just doesn't depict what was discussed. So I just ask that it gets struck out completely.
I was going to say, or could a simple correction just be discussed the liability to the district? Just cross out concerns.
Well, this is the problem. It wasn't about the liability. We actually, the discussion centered about ways that we could make that living space available to people in the future and in actually a positive way. So I think it was misconstrued entirely in that comment there. So I would just suggest we take it out for this point.
We can pass a motion that says the minutes are accepted.
Subject to.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the committee vote on that.
Yep.
So make a motion.
That will be the motion, that we adopt the minutes subject to striking of the statement that says concerns expressed regarding liability to district for having living space under flood construction levels. And David seconds. Yes. And all in favor? Against? No? Okay. There we go. Okay. The first item of business arising is 37870 Cleveland Avenue, Plaza Junction Park. And we'll pass over to our planner.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so my name's Philp. I'm a planner with Community Planning and Infrastructure. Hi, everybody. I'm going to do some brief background to this project before I pass it along to the applicant's architect team. We've brought this project to an advisory design panel twice prior to this meeting. So we came in the summer of 2017, and it was also presented in the summer of 2018, and that was working through the rezoning process. And it was a look at the overall siting and massing and very early discussions about what exactly the buildings would look like. And the team took that into consideration, and it really shaped how we structured the rezoning. And their project's been fairly well flushed out through the rezoning process, and now we're in the development permit stage. So now we're looking for ADP's detailed review of the form and character against two development permit areas, DPA 3, which is our universal guidelines, and DPA 5, which is our downtown commercial center guidelines. And so we've provided staff's review against each guideline as an appendix that you will see there. So just quickly, the project's located at the south end of Cleveland downtown. It makes up an entire block. The proposal's a mixed use with essentially 3 buildings, the south and the middle buildings being a mix of commercial and with residential above, kind of your standard that we're seeing lately downtown. And then the northern building, which is kind of attached onto the north end of the middle building, is a 4-story employment center with commercial at grade, and then 3 stories of office above. That's their proposal. In terms of context, of course, we have our downtown parks to the north of this site. Ocean Pavilion and Junction Park and Woonayik Park are all to the north. There's a vacant lot to the south. It's also vacant to the east with the decommissioned rail line and the Manclan Blind Channel beyond. And then to the west, we have existing developments, so the brew pub, an apartment building, and then another mixed-use development that's in the process of being built out right now. Just some quick things to highlight about the project. They've got a lot of public open space, plaza space associated with the project. So there's a small plaza that's at the southern corner of Cleveland and Vancouver. We've got a mid-block plaza that separates kind of the two mixed-use buildings. And then at the north end, comprising mostly the Main Street road right-of-way, the developer is proposing a very significant plaza space that would be what we call WUNERF, or like a shared space where pedestrians are sharing the space with vehicles. And that would be something novel to Squamish, but that has been executed in many other jurisdictions. And we think that project is so significant that it warrants a separate review by the design panel. And staff have an internal working group with both kind of our public space experts and active transportation people. So we're providing comments currently to the applicant specifically on that plaza, and then we want to bring it to the VP at a later date. So just so you're aware, we can accept comments obviously on the plaza at this point, but you'll get a second crack at it basically. So yeah, as normal, we're seeking the design panel's overall recommendations around the form and character, the overall architectural design, the materials, the landscape plan, all of that normal stuff. And I just want to highlight for the panel, staff's kind of focused in on 3 comments that we would like you guys to speak to. The first one is the overall design and location within the development of the outdoor amenity spaces. So there's several in each of the buildings, one on level 3, as well as the rooftop, and we're looking for your comments in regards to the usability of the space around weather protection, sun exposure, wind considerations, as well as any programming and things like the amenities and furnishings of those spaces. So we'd love to hear your detailed comments around those spaces. Secondly, we're interested to hear from you guys on the storefront designs as they relate to the guidelines. We have a lot of specific guidelines that speak to achieving a human scale, a fine grained pattern that reflects the historical frontages that are further up Cleveland. And of course, we want to achieve the highest level of visual interest in inviting people to come further down Cleveland Avenue to ensure that kind of the High Street, or Cleveland High Street status is continued. So we'd like some comments around that. And then thirdly, we've asked for additional supporting information to assist in the review of this project. So things like the view analysis, shade analysis, lighting for the site, more detail around the landscape specifications, and energy details around energy efficiency. So we've asked the applicant for that, and we're wondering ADP's thoughts around those items as well.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
We don't have landscape representation here, and I'm just
We
curious.
do, yes.
Oh, it's not in
On the
our,
panel.
oh, we don't have.
Yeah. So a little bit uncomfortable with being able to provide full feedback on that aspect. It's unfortunate those 2 members can't be here.
Yeah.
Perhaps we'll ask them if they can weigh in later on, if that's possible.
I'll leave that in your hands
Okay.
to debate and decide what you'd like to do in that regard. It could be related to the recommendation, but it's I guess it's your decision.
Important aspect of this project, for sure. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so that's all I had to say about it. If you are all right, I will pass it along to the applicant for them to present their design.
Thank you.
And then we'll get into questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jane Song. I'm with AKA Architecture and Design. I will introduce the rest of the design team here today. Andres Kaminsky and Luke Tyson, both from AKA, and our landscape architect Tom Barrett from So just to recap a little bit on the history of the project, we did go through quite a rigorous rezoning process. When we started on this, we realized right away there was a feeling that this project, given its location, could be quite important and impactful and could make a meaningful contribution to the life and livability of Squamish. So we worked with the District of Squamish Planning Council through Committee of the Whole a number of times through their advisory panel, as Asia mentioned. We also met with the public a number of times to identify the key concerns and opportunities and goals for the project. So we looked at view impact studies, sun and shadow studies, connecting through to existing public spaces, creating new public spaces, creating animated streetscapes along both Cleveland Avenue and Loggers Lane. This is quite a large and complex site, and it required a lot of investigation while we set community-based design goals. This rezoning process resulted in the creation of the comprehensive development zone for the site, which determined the building heights, setbacks, and defined the right-of-way between the buildings, which is that pedestrian-only access route. So the building, massing, and open spaces, and so on were all determined at that rezoning stage. So we're really excited to continue on with the design process and formulate the architectural language for the place to develop some real character that we think is pretty unique and appropriate for Squamish. So going back a bit, I think it is important still to understand the context of the site. It's quite got quite a number of different edges to it. First and foremost, along Cleveland Avenue, that's a very obvious place for a commercial streetscape. On the other side of the street, that's sort of the urban edge where we're relating to the larger scale projects on that side of the street, starting with the Main, which is a 6-story mixed-use residential building, Studio SQ, which is a 4-story residential building, and then the House and Brew Pub, which is a pretty established business here in Squamish. On the north side of the site, we're up against Junction Park, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's quite an active public space where the farmers market is hosted, the OCM Pavilion is there, and so there's just a number of events and festivals that occur pretty regularly in that space over the year. So that is a really important feature that the project needed to respond to. The other edge is Loggers Lane, which it's envisioned to be a little bit more public than it is currently. So that became another public face that we were trying to create and invent. So we included these diagrams again. This is going back again to the rezoning stage. Basically, during that process, we identified a number of the key goals that actually informed the design of this site. So we were responding to considerations like preserving the views of the chief from some specific locations, creating a mix of massing forms. So you'll see we have a variation of 2-story, 4-story, 6- and 8-story forms. There's also a focus on the public spaces, so the plazas and pedestrian connectivity, and that enhancement, doing whatever we could to enhance that treatment of Loggers Lane. So those are the principles that guided the rezoning and that we can continue to refer back to as we're designing, developing the design. This is basically just a key map to show you the overall features of the site. So starting on the north side, we have the Main Street Plaza, which faces onto the 4-story office building. So that's dedicated employment space, which is a key feature of the site, of the project. The continuous commercial facades are pretty crucial along Cleveland Avenue, so creating that continuous storefront activity along there. And then the 2 buildings up above, the residential buildings, we're calling them the north building and the south building. So this is a site plan of the ground floor plane. And basically, what you can see is that we've dedicated as much space as possible to public use and public interaction. So basically everything you see in blue is commercial or retail space. So that the commercial storefronts don't just line Cleveland Avenue, but they kind of wrap down into each of the side streets or the pedestrian right-of-way. So the idea is to try to promote as much activity and draw people through also to Loggers Lane and to the waterfront area there as well. So it was a bit of a challenge to try to activate all 4 sides of the building. You can see also, you know, we do need the you know, that service space. The parking and access to the parking is all through Loggers Lane, and we'll talk about that more later on. But the other key features there are the plazas, which Asia also mentioned. They vary in scale and in use. The largest being the Main Street Plaza facing the OCM Pavilion, and we really wanted to create, you know, kind of a more of a civic plaza feeling there to be able to host different size events. The mid-block plaza is pedestrian retail focused, so we'll get into that a bit more, but it's a different scale of inhabitation that we're envisioning there. And then again on Vancouver Street, there's like that small corner plaza which relates a bit to the brew pub across the street, just to create a little bit of a breathing space and some openness to the view of the chief from the house and pub. We're trying to keep this presentation simple, but it's there is a lot going on. This sheet is actually a good overview of the whole project, so I think we're going to spend a little time here. The first thing you'll see, I'm just going to focus on the buildings for now, starting with the office building on the end. That's a 4-story mass timber CLT structure, so cross-laminated timber, which we think is very appropriate for Squamish, and will just create a really great presence on the street, because you'll be able to see and experience the wood from the outside as well. The roof structure is composed of those curved blue lamb beams, which we feel relate somewhat to the OCM Pavilion, or at least those curved sweeping lines, curved windswept sweeping lines. We just kind of like how dynamic and organic that feels. The rest of the building is, you know, it's a fairly typical office floor plate. The outside of the building we've articulated by composing a facade of solid metal panels with open glazing, and so it's kind of hard to tell from this one view, but that the openings and like the amount of openness is determined by the direction it's facing. So on the west facade, we have limited the amount of openings versus other facades.
And that's to address solar gain on that side. So each elevation is treated differently, sort of depending on the amount of sunlight or direct heat that it gets. So facing west, you've got more screening essentially with solid wall than you have facing east or north.
Yeah, you can kind of see it a bit better in the bottom rendering. That's the view facing Loggers Lane. So you can see how on that face there's a lot more open glazing, and then as it wraps around the side, it just gets a little more closed off and controlled. We should also talk about the residential buildings. So we have two buildings. The middle one, which we're calling the North Building, is a total of 6 stories, wood frame construction. So there's 4 stories of wood frame construction on top of the concrete, 2 levels of concrete. The South Building is a total of 8 stories. So that's 6 stories of steel, light steel frame construction on top of a concrete podium. So that's a non-combustible construction type. So for those 2 buildings, we developed this language of perforated metal screens which form the exterior face of the balconies. So those help us out in a few ways. We're using them structurally so that the balconies can be structurally independent of the face of the building, and this helps limit the thermal bridging because that attachment point between the exterior facade and a balcony can be a point of heat loss. So we're also using those balconies to create some pretty deep overhangs to create some shading and things like that to that western facade that is kind of the area where it will have the most effect. We also are using those light screens because we feel like it's a very nice device for creating some lightness along that facade. It's a little bit different from the typical mixed-use residential projects you see with those glass balconies everywhere. We're kind of using it to create sort of a veil-like effect as another tool for breaking down the massing and creating a unique language for the residential portion of those buildings.
This is a sample of the type of the material that we're looking at using for the screens. So it's perforated metal.
It's sharp.
It's sharp, yeah. It's this
I
sample.
got it.
But as you can see through it. It's really interesting material. Depending on how the light is on it, it offers some shading for sure and some screening, and will have quite a light. It'll be painted, yes.
Oh, white?
It'll be white, yeah.
And is
it'll
it
have very light-
corrugated like that?
Yeah,
It'll be.
it will be. Yeah. That's right.
So we feel that those screens create a little bit of variation over that facade. Sometimes we're staggering it so they don't line up, and in other locations we are actually lining them up vertically. I think it just helps create a little bit of interest over the length of that building. The other thing we could talk about on this sheet are just the commercial storefronts. So you can see we have created a rhythm that relates to the typical commercial storefront sizes on the rest further down Cleveland Avenue. So those are 50-foot facades, and we have a little more detail on those further in the package. And then on the Loggers Lane side, which is in the bottom rendering, you can see it is a little bit of a different facade there. It's doesn't have the same commercial storefronts, but we were still trying to create a proper streetscape with a bit of its own language to kind of draw people along that road so that it doesn't feel like a service or an access laneway.
And the parking, there's the second floor of the building is an entire level of parking. So we've got a whole floor of parking that's hidden behind sort of the darker black screen, which will be the same type of screen that we have here, to hide the parking. And the parking is cantilevered over the sidewalk, so you've got protected sidewalk on the Lovers Lane side for rain and weather protection. And the parking on the front side is behind the kind of larger signage bands along that entire sort of second level of the commercial. So the commercial storefronts to hide the parking behind.
Yeah. So probably the biggest public amenity feature introduced by this project would be the Main Street Plaza, which Asia wants us to talk about later, but
That's gonna be like,
skip.
yeah.
But you know, it is an important feature. We definitely spent a lot of time creating architecture that opened out onto that plaza, that invited it. At the ground floor plane, we have commercial space that we're envisioning could also spill out onto that space. We've also organized it so that it's a transformative public space. So meaning that there's different modes and activation modes. So we have a straight up street mode where it would just be a continuation of Main Street and cars could continue to pass through and connect to Loggers Lane. We have the activated street mode where the vehicular access is a little bit more limited, where you could park food trucks and still have like a very controlled passage through. And then in the final mode, it would be entirely closed off to vehicular traffic and could be used to host larger events that could spill over from Junction Park. So it's many types of activities that we do picture happening there, which is actually would augment many of the events that already occur in that area. The next one is the mid-block Vancouver Street Plaza. So this we kind of envision more as a retail courtyard plaza. So a lot of the precedent images you'll see are about facades that open with seating that opens out onto that courtyard, so that you're sharing. There's like a merge between, you know, the retail and the public space. The other important thing about that mid-block plaza is just one of the principles that planning is talking about is the mid-block connection, so that pedestrians can, that there's no solid blocks and pedestrians can pass through at the midpoint. So this is meant to create a connection through from the other side of Cleveland Avenue and onto Loggers Lane. Did we miss? Oh yeah. Sorry, I skipped over Vancouver. Yeah, sorry. The Vancouver Street Plaza. That's at the end of the block. It's just a smaller scale plaza, so we don't really picture a lot of, you know, a ton of activity there, but just enough so that there's something happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a corner plaza where there's the opportunity for the adjacent spaces, whether they're coffee shops or restaurants, to break out into that space and have some activation on the street. That opportunity.
At a much smaller scale. So we developed a few different commercial storefronts. The top one is probably the most common one. It's the one facing Cleveland Avenue. So, you know, there's a lot of, like Asia mentioned, human scale features that I think are quite important to Squamish. One is to have that weather protection. So that commercial canopy over this street is something that we've we've applied as much as possible over Cleveland, over all the storefronts really.
Oh, this is one of the sheets that we've replaced. So if you have a look at the, yeah, so there's a little detail on it.
So although the storefronts are similar, there is opportunity to vary the identity of each space through a signage program. So there are different signage, sign ban areas, so you could occupy the hanging sign, you could apply directly on to the small signage area above the windows. There's also that wood accent panel or an accent area where we feel that you could also create your own retail identity. We also brought in our materials palette, we have samples of the basalt brick that we would like to use. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's these two. So we're picturing a variation between a rough basalt brick and then a smooth-based one. And then we developed different storefronts for the various conditions. So if you're on the corner, we have a storefront design that kind of wraps that corner so that the signage band above is continuous and you can see it continuing down the side street. And then we also have the third storefront type, which is at the office, on the end of the office building. So that one is a little bit more absorbed into the office building identity. Talk about maybe.
Yeah, I think the thing I would note here is the streetscape, the actual surface of the sidewalk comes basically straight out of the standards for Cleveland Avenue. It consists of, from left to right, a landscape band where you have the opportunity for the landscape, the lighting standards, etc. And then a field of concrete which is bordered by sandblasted or colored concrete. Sure, okay. So on this one, I guess this is also, these 2 pages are ones that we've added. We've put a little bit more detail into that in the original package. This really talks about the amenity spaces that are located on the building itself. So from the top right, that's a outdoor amenity space that's on the third floor, so the top of the podium on the south side, facing towards where the water would be. And so we've got a canopy structure and landscape features in there. And the canopy structure doesn't show well on there, but actually, if you look at the image below it to the right, you'll see through the canopy, it's part trellis and part solid cover to provide rain protection. And in that space, there would be the opportunity for dining spaces or places where you could hang out when it's actually raining. And then the remainder of the spaces are out on the deck level and in the sun when it's sunny. And to the left of that one, so the second from the right, that's an image from the inside of, underneath the canopy on the rooftop, amenity space. So there, on the rooftops of both buildings, both residential buildings, are fairly large canopied areas and outdoor amenity space. And again, it's part trellis and part solid cover to provide some rain protection when and usability when the weather's not great. And I'm sure Tom will speak to the landscape and the design furnishings of these spaces. Oh, and the image on the bottom left, second from Second from the left is it's a small outdoor space that's located adjacent to the office building. And it's envisioned as a small seating and collection place.
So at the level 3, it's kind of unclear, but there's that office building on the end, and then the residential building, we're calling the north building. In between them at level 3, there's a little bit of a plaza space there that's accessible to both the office building occupants and the residents. So there's a little bit of a crossover space there.
I guess we could probably hand it over to Tom.
Oh, actually, no, there's one more thing we should mention on this. Just quickly, there's so much to this project, but we did want to touch on the fact that, we have to go down another.
Yeah.
So you can see on the east elevation, the elevation facing Loggers Lane, we have been going through a bit of a public art consultation process with a consultant. So this person has organized a public art selection committee and organized the process to select an artist, and Andreas can speak a bit more to that, but we basically identified an area of the building that would be appropriate and a good scale, and it would be quite impactful, I think, on that side, because it'll be very visible from the waterfront.
Basically it's located where the screens are at the level 2 parkade, and the process isn't complete at the moment. But what we have is we've chosen an artist, James Harry, who will provide what you see there. And basically, it's a creation story that relates to Squamish and to the Squamish chief. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's a big sort of a black scar across the chief called the Black Dyke, and there's a myth around that centers around a two-headed serpent, and it's one of the creations of the local peoples, and this is an interpretation of that. We've got we have this a presentation booklet that James Harry put together. You can have a glance at that.
I think that concludes our portion. Just in the back of the package, we've also included, sun studies and things like that, which were an important part of the rezoning process, and it's also a requirement in the DP. But it's basically it's a very similar material to what had been produced previously.
Get your thing like
Well, yeah, it's just a simple window. Okay, that's just, you've seen this from what Jane was, but what I just wanted to focus on was the amount of streetscape and the amount of planting, and that when you're in a situation like this with planting against a curb and walkway, it's a very kind of harsh environment. So a good example of good and bad is along the drive in North Vancouver, and we were doing a project down there, so my attention was guessing on what was working. And you can tell it's a lot of trees and grasses, and there's the street trees as well. And then in an even harsher environment, so my own planting projects in Whistler that are working quite well. Down here is a parking lot where the O'Dane Museum is, and this is the Athlete Village. And this is a kind of a blend of grasses and rows, and kind of gives a lot of texture. It's a little bit wild, but it's not real clean. But what we won't have is kind of shrubs sticking up and compacted earth and stuff. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to that. So I want you to have the confidence that we'll be dealing with the planting along there will be successful. Jane spoke to you about that middle plaza. I don't really need to say much, except the way that just the planting and integration of it is broken up, and that people can experience the seeding, which is right there, and the planting beside it. So it's kind of a rich texture to it that brings people through it. And there's a couple of representative images of it. Same with Vancouver Corner. I don't need to say much about that one. Oh, got it. So that's the third level, and it represents what I'm trying to indicate there is the green roof product we want to use. It's called Live Roof. And what I want to bring your attention to is an 8-inch edge to it that holds the soil. More of a sedum lower type planting. This is the kind of planting we'll achieve in these images. And they were located all around the perimeter up against people's patios, decks, and around the amenity areas. This is the product. I just want to dwell on it a bit. They come pre-packaged or pre-planted boxes, plastic boxes with drainage underneath it. This white plastic piece comes out. So what it means is all those boxes, the box would be what, 2 or 3 inches high. That plastic gives an 8-inch height for soil. You take out the plastic divider, the soil all blends itself in together. So then you have a good depth of soil, a good green roof, without the problems of concrete walls and associated structural and future repair of membranes and slabs. So if there's any repair needed, these pieces just get picked up and replaced. Again, here's the edge here that's custom designed for it. Now here's renderings of the third floor amenity areas. Here's a covered, partially covered pergola that Andreas was referring to. This is the kind of planting it will be. This is the kind of furnishings that will be there. Solterra is very specific and very much oriented towards these amenity areas and referred me to a number of projects to look at in the Lower Mainland to illustrate the attention they pay to that level and the quality that they produce. Now this, since this project has a second floor, parking is quite a fair-sized podium. These are the patios, decks that Andreas and Jane referred to. Then we have this space out here is going to be different and unique in the sense that it's an extension of the patio. This is the private patio. They have this extension in it to do as they wish. They can planting, seeding, whatever. And then there's your live roof product here. These gates allow for the maintenance, only maintenance crews that go through there. They would maintain these things. And so this is an extra level of amenity that the owners, the residents, will have rather than that space just being completely planting or left bare. So it's kind of a unique situation that grows out of the design of the building and makes it more of a richer residential experience. This is actually the 7th and 9th floor. This purpose of this is to show the kind of level of furnishings. We'll have fire pits, seating around the fire pits, harvest table, barbecue. So we have the opportunity of putting some of this under a covered area. So users can go, we use this covered area, we'll go out into the open area and enjoy the views to the chief and the planting and the seating arrangement will be oriented for views to the chief. And then there's your sort of planting area around it. And this was just a rendering of us. We would try to work out, well, what would be the experience of being up there on the 7th or 9th floor at sunset or dark. So we're working with lighting coming down from the pergola above, with some lighting coming down from here, lighting coming out from the fire pits, so, and the planting around. So our intention is to sort of recreate a nice experience on those different levels. And I think this building provides that opportunity more than most that we see. Now I want to just go through, we've done a sort of fair level of analysis and thought about the Main Street Plaza. You can pick up on what Jane was saying. This area, there's a 7-meter road access through, 2-meter dedicated pedestrian, which are givens. This is a kind of interface between commercial, there's a sort of a planting and benches that kind of prevent a porous barrier usable to the plaza area or to the road. This connects, this is would always sort of remain kind of open as a kind of an event area that relates to the Junction Park and Siam building. So if I start to look at it, the context of it, when you really look at it, these main green spaces, this is Stanford Park right across the street, we're sitting right here, connects to Junction Park. So you can see there's this whole connection through to Squamish's major park space. This is the event, sort of what the events look like at Siam. This is back of house. This is the Main Street Plaza, so we have to be aware of where vehicles can go, garbage collection, etc. And how we can join those two spaces together, and one enhances the other. So in the definition really of a kind of a shared space is where the two outside edges, in this case commercial and park, merge into that plaza area. And it's pedestrian dominant is a word that you see in a lot of these descriptions. Shortly after we started working on this, I was in the south of France for a week, so walking around, suddenly I realized I'm seeing a lot of these principles of Woolworths, which is a new word to me. And that what I was finding in the town of Nice is that most of it is pedestrian dominant. And you sort of almost just seeing it around. Woolworth seems to be more of a residential. By the time I see descriptions of it, it's referring to a lot of, like you see this example of homes here, but a lot of the common denominators, if you look at this, everywhere there was a division of pedestrians, this was this beautiful white brick stone. It gave you a visual symbol that there's something going on here. So if you look at that tower there, this tower, and I'm taking pictures when there's the least amount of busyness so that you can see it, but there's this vehicle that creeps on down there. That is very much a pedestrian dominant kind of a space. And then you see these other elements of traffic control that are kind of interesting. And then we were on our way to a garden competition display on the waterfront in Antibes, and I got a bit of grief for stopping at this intersection. What's so interesting about this intersection? Here's a commercial side, here's a park side, you see down here, and here's the road traffic control, where you see the same elements. Wide sidewalks, shopping, protective bollard barriers, signs that warn you of pedestrian. This doodad goes up and down, the bollard, I guess, which controls it, which Andres was just speaking to. This kind of forest barrier to the commercial seating. And this is the park side. Something's under construction there. So it kind of struck me that this was a very similar thing. They seem to have worked it out. Well, it's different, but it just struck me as kind of interesting to be there and see that it does work and people thought it through and it's a no-brainer, I suppose. Narrower roads, they don't seem to have these huge, wide things. And the other thing we noticed, well, so this is, did I own this one? No? So this is our our layout. It's what you just showed you in the slide, but it describes just these different components that I was just speaking about. This sort of planting, and these seats are really oriented towards the chief. And then in this image, protected bollards might be used for suggesting that one of these ideas is to have kind of climbable or usable seating that functions as sort of almost like a play area. These kind of basalt edge seating, smooth pavers that we use at the Paralympic Games, where the Abbotsford Country Stone would be good for accessibility without rattling kind of the wheelchair. And this varied kind of use with the food truck and such. And then that's our rendering of how we would see that, where you've got this visual warning. The fact that the paving goes across is very critical to us, and from what I was noticing in some of France, that it starts to tell you that that is not a vehicle area, it's a pedestrian type area. Anyway, it's important. This is just how the area would combine together. The porous kind of work through into the commercial area, and then this easy, nice sort of joining with the Junction Park. I think that concludes everything I have to say.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Is that everything altogether? Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Jackie.
Can I ask my question now?
Yes, actually.
If I have 10 seconds?
Can you come to the table?
Oh, yes, I can.
Um,
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry to hear. I missed your opening comments about the public art aspect. I love the artist you've chosen. Thank you very much. Will there be other opportunities for public art in the other spaces of the plazas?
Other opportunities. I know we had discussed other opportunities, and I don't think we're kind of prepared to share what those might be. But also there are some existing pieces of art that are located in Junction Park
Yes.
that will incorporate into the plaza.
Okay.
The piece that's there stays in its same spot.
Yeah.
We're not moving. It integrates. Well, there it is here.
Yeah.
That's it there. So
Oh, yes,
it
that piece.
integrates with
Yeah.
the design. We're working with it.
And I'm sorry, Asia, did you say that this was coming back to the public art committee at some point? Another portion of this? I missed,
I
just
don't,
caught the tail end of what you were saying.
yeah, I don't think this is coming back. It might be more on an information basis
Okay.
to talk about the applicant's chosen artist and the design they're proposing, and to get the committee's feedback on it. But,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, they're well into the process. They've selected their artists. They're kind of on their way.
There was a process whereby the developer hired a public art consultant, and then that consultant facilitated the process of creating a selection committee of people who would select the art, as well as getting proposals for the various artists.
And I
Bringing
believe
that
there
to the
was one or two members of the district's public art committee
Yeah,
on that
That's right.
selection committee.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry, I have to,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll go into a round of questions here, and I'll start with Farzan, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you for presentation. I appreciate it. I think my first question is from staff. If you can briefly tell me what is the difference between this CD zone and let's say C4, what are the changes?
The primary
Setback,
change is probably
height.
the height.
And
The
FAR?
setbacks are similar because you can go to 0, if it's an external street-facing side. So the
Mhm.
setbacks are pretty much the same.
Alright.
Just the additional height,
How
I would
much?
say 2 stories.
2 stories high.
Yeah.
Okay. And then What about FAR or FGR?
Well, there's no,
Nothing.
there's nothing that is of relation to what we did in the C4 zone of tying it in a way to the provision of employment space. You know, there's kind of the scales in the C4 zone that were added a couple of years ago, so.
I mean, FAR 2.
I can speak to these things, if it's okay.
Sure.
So this process started before
This was yeah, I understand.
before C4 was updated to the current status. So some of the differences are the height for sure. C4 would only allow 6, we're going to 8. But C4 doesn't have a requirement for setbacks. And we had a requirement as part of the rezoning to set back the residential buildings from the edge of the podium quite a bit. So in terms of that move basically controls the FAR on it, and it would be a lower FAR than what you could achieve with C4.
And that angle of 55 degree that we have in Cleveland is not applied here.
It is not applied here.
Okay. And you mentioned that it's light steel structure for the southern building. Is it the same for the rest?
So the southern building will be light steel structure on concrete podium, so the
Right.
entire podium will be concrete.
Right.
The 6-story, so the middle the building would be wood frame,
And
and then the office would be, at the moment, we're considering that as a CLT or glue down
right.
structure.
CRT, okay. And what is the sustainability? Are we having any level of energy and sustainability? What did you have? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, definitely.
I may have missed it. I don't know. You may have mentioned it.
Well, it'll be built to step 3 of the
Okay.
of the building code,
Okay.
which is, you know, fairly rigorous, I guess, at this point. But in anticipation of that and not knowing where we were going to be, we designed the building to be simple forms, you know, that basically are sustainable forms in terms of energy. So,
Just
You
straight
know, that-
extrusions.
Right.
you know, like when you go to step 4, everybody says, oh, the building's going to be a box. So we started with that premise. Well, it's going to be a box, or does it have to be a box? So the building envelope is a box. You know, so very simple,
Right.
with very little sort of energy loss areas. But then everything that we added on adds the articulation.
Right.
The screens, the decks, and those things are added on not only as kind of lipstick, but also with very specific sustainable principles in mind. For instance, every unit has a considerable overhang of in front of it, so that controls the sun in the summer. It cuts down the sun angle in the summer, and therefore heat gain. Permits low angle sun to come in the winter, and that, you know, those types of things. So yeah, the forms of the buildings I think are derived very much from sustainable principles.
Sure. Have you considered this with BC Hydro and this high tension cable? I don't know if it continues all the way in the lugger lanes all to this block, or it doesn't. I don't know.
I also don't know. Do you
Have you
guys?
checked it with BC Hydro?
No, I don't think it does.
No? Because that's the main high tension cable that feeds the whole downtown. And it's on lugger lane, right next to your parking.
We have discussed what needs to happen there, and yeah.
Okay.
That's a huge discussion that we had about 2 years ago when we started the rezoning.
Right, I'm sure, it's fine, I'm
So
sorry.
I don't have that information at hand, but I think it was dealt with.
I didn't see any PMT on the site. Is it somewhere that,
There are PMTs.
I don't know, maybe I missed it. That's
Yeah, on
fine.
Loggers Lane.
They're
It is-
adjacent to the waste rooms.
Oh, okay.
Or, yeah. They're hard to see on the site plan, but
Okay.
they basically are on either side of the mid-block plaza on Loggers Lane.
Yeah. It's a lot of information, so
It
it's
is.
easy
Yeah.
to
Yes, it
miss.
is.
And what's south of this southern building? What's happening there at the south of the southern
On the
building?
south side of Vancouver Street, so
Yes.
yeah, that's another interesting edge. That's the part of town called Downtown South. So it is a light industrial or artisan area.
So light industry, 2-story or 1-story
That's right.
boxes.
Yes, it's
It's an empty site.
Empty site.
the
Yes,
site directly
the
to the
site's
south.
vacant and Catamount Slough actually covers a portion of that site, and it's kind of the gateway to oceanfront. So
Mhm.
there's a lot more future planning that needs to be done around that, because it is quite a transitional area between downtown to the waterfront, and there'll be a lot of grade changes and flood protection related
Right.
things that have yet to be determined.
I'm basically, my comment is related to the height of the building at the south and next to the whatever is happening at the south, and how are you going to treat that? It's all in your training. I don't know how you're going to deal with it, but it's going to be interesting.
Yes.
And what's the finish of the parking on this second floor?
So
Again,
the second floor, so along Cleveland Avenue, the storefronts go up 2 stories.
on the loggers there.
And on Loggers Lane, there'll be metal screens at the second floor.
Okay.
And
So it
the
will
public
be
art will be on one section of that.
Natural ventilation.
That's right.
So we have to be very careful with that BC Hydro if it is ventilation.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it a possibility to have the more covered outdoor amenity, because it's out there and it's all open? Could we have some covered one? Or because it's all, is it
Which amenities space?
at the top rooftop?
Oh, yeah, there is cover at the
There are?
rooftop
Yeah, so
level.
you might
Yeah.
be looking at an older
Yeah, if you look at the
version.
next page of the,
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, okay.
so there'll be a trellis structure with solid covering over the central
I see.
area of it.
Oh, here.
At the
Okay.
entrances.
No, I didn't look at that.
And so the rooftop access is really just to get to that rooftop deck.
Yes.
So there's a lot of area up there, and some of that will be covered.
Right,
not all of
okay.
it.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Mike?
Yeah, thanks guys, the presentation's quite stunning. Couple questions, so this actually answered a lot of the questions that I had, because I couldn't see, just what Farzan said was how much of the roof was covered. So some of the, like is it like 50% of sort of the louvered roof section has soffit over part of it and the other part's still
Yeah.
open?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And then on...
What we wanted to do in each one of the cases was create a kind of exterior room. So on the roof, you see a couple of large tables, right? A couple of large harvest tables with 10 people kind of each. So that whole area would be covered. So it would that kind of equivalent area.
And then the one on level 3 at the south end, kind of looking out over the water and staring at the chief, that's also covered?
That's right. Yeah.
And then you had mentioned that there was a common space that was shared between the north building and the office building? Is that, yeah?
That's right.
Where is that? Is that the one that I see on?
Yeah.
So
That's
that's
right.
between the,
Yeah.
so that can be used for the residential and the office?
Yeah.
Gotcha. And there's no covered space on that one, though?
On that one, there is.
Great.
Yeah.
That, just so you know, that space also connects on the residential side to an interior amenity space for the residents. So the feeling is that on a rainy day, you would actually
Just use
just
that.
you would go inside.
Can you speak, so one of the things that we're supposed to comment on is just sort of how the storefronts speak to the existing sort of Squamish storefronts on the main street. Could you speak to how you kept in mind sort of the historical building frontages when you planned your new ones?
Yeah, so,
Sort of ties
why
in.
don't I, give me a second here. I should- Yeah, so this is in the overall, not that you'd ever see it all together, but each one of those, the kind of blocks that you see is maximum 50 feet, which is about the width of the existing storefronts in downtown Cleveland to the north.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to maintain that sort of module. understanding that that whole first floor is basically potentially is one large commercial space. So we wanted to break it down into, what appeared to be separate spaces and have, a few different treatments of those spaces. For instance, this is all commercial under here. And so it's, it's basically all glazing under an overhang that the building makes, being over that space. And then we've got some green space breaking off, a 50-foot module, which could be an individual store or part of, a larger space as well. And then this is the entry for the residential. So there's another kind of, broken off piece that, that kind of speaks to that smaller module that you have on Cleveland, rather than doing a continuous elevation of, 300 feet or something like that. That was like the first story of a big box store or something like that.
The other thing that we've done in the work that we do in Squamish, we do like to refer back to the similar palette of materials. So the basalt tile, you probably noticed there's a lot of basalt in town. So we are still using it, but we're kind of applying it in a different kind of texture and varying that texture over the course of the street. We also still really like using wood in our commercial facades. It's just really an appropriate choice. I think by using it as the soffit material, it just has a continuous more presence on the street, but it's also not like overwhelming with wood. And aside from that, we do like using quite a bit of metal in our work because we just feel that industrial language is quite appropriate. So those are sort of the main features.
Thank you. Sorry. So I had what the shading elements were. These. So on the commercial space, the black sort of undulated facade. What is that actual material? Is that this again?
That is, yeah.
Not painted black.
Yeah, that's right.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's perfect. And that's, it probably shows up in here. So yeah, then that's where the public art will be mounted onto that surface of that and be backlit as well.
I like that. And then besides like sort of decoupling your, I guess, architectural elements and decks, patios and things like that, what else did you try and incorporate as far as like energy efficiency goes? Like is it like fiberglass windows or was there?
Yeah.
You mentioned you're trying to keep in mind thermal bridging.
Yeah. I have a list of things here that are key strategies of the BC Energy Step Code, which are I'll just read through them. So simplified massing, which we spoke about, minimizing heat losses through orientation, and that it's about taking advantage of solar heat gain when you can, and addressing the different elevations of the building. For instance, on the north side of the building, on the west side of the building, we have on the west side less window to reduce heat gain, but on the north side where you get a lot of heat loss, that changes relative to orientation. Unit density, so basically the amount of units that you get per length of exterior wall. So you want more units per less exterior wall, because then that's less energy use overall in this heat loss. Optimizing fenestration, and that's about the size of the windows as well as the window types. So having enough windows for natural light, but considering how the windows will, what trade-offs there are because of energy loss. And then there's balance there when you're picking the windows. Yeah, are they vinyl windows? Does that work, or do they have to be fiberglass windows and triple glazed to make that work? So all of these things are they're either in the pipeline to be considered and worked out as we do the technical drawings.
We have done some we have been working with an energy advisor So we're still balancing the decisions, but all of those things factor into it.
Yeah, including extra insulation on the exterior insulation, bound insulation, things like that.
Sorry, just to further complicate, the steel frame building could be different from the wood in terms of the trade-offs.
And then another thing is having all of our roof surfaces and our deck surfaces, having those as light colored surfaces. So wherever we have roofing or pavers, having a light covered surface so that you're not, excessively heating the building from solar radiation again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for that presentation. Lots of information. I had a few questions as well. One question was the southeast curb radius on Vancouver Street and Loggers Lane is really big. I'm wondering.
Oh, yeah, just quickly, so that's a truck route to the terminals. And so that was engineered, and we took land from this property to facilitate that. So that's an engineering kind of exercise that we went through previously during the rezoning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. But I agree.
Yeah, just for like sort of pedestrian access and safety, not
Yeah.
great. And another question about the width of the Main Street Plaza. Just sort of, yeah, if you guys thought of other, or looking at, I know you're saying still looking at the plaza width, but the 7-meter sort of curb to curb.
Oh, the 7-meter curb to curb is for the drive up.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you looked at other, just knowing Winnerfs often have the photos that you showed Tom, and you noted they're narrow, and so just wondered if you looked at any other discussion with the district.
Yeah, definitely. The 7-meter requirement was set by us through discussions with internal departments, fire, and it was thought if you want to have 2 cars pass side by side, then that's kind of the minimum that we need.
A question about the office space on the north side and whether or not the facade has an overhang. I think the signage is harder to tell if there's an overhang there or how that interacts with that.
Yeah. Okay, let me just.
It's a little bit, I think it's 8 meter or 8 feet instead of 9 or 10 up.
You're talking about along this edge?
Yeah. If there's any weather protection.
There is, yeah. The dark colored wall overhangs the line of glass which is down in the side there.
It's almost like there's an arcade through there, so there's like a column on the outside edge, and then like some covered area.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see here, but so here's in the plan up here, there's the edge of the glass, and the building actually comes almost out to this red line out here. So this space here is covered.
Okay.
Along that entire edge.
Then another question about bicycle parking. I see the large 2 bike parkades, which I'm assuming are for residents. Any thoughts of secure parking for other employees or visitors?
Well, yeah. So those parking spaces are largely for the residents, but there is also a requirement for the commercial space. So we will have some of these spaces will be dedicated to the commercial parking, and then we've got exterior parking space or spaces around the building, which subsequent to the package that you've got, we've moved them undercover where it was a concern that we heard from Asia, so we basically moved them undercover wherever we could and provided some closer to the residential entrance as well undercover.
I'm not sure if we discussed this too, but potentially breaking up the bike rooms so that they're not as massive.
Yeah,
As
they
well.
can be subdivided.
Yeah.
They could be, yeah, that's right.
That's something that I'll
Because
bring forward.
even just thinking, Squamish bikes are not typically your local commuter bike, and that just wondering how that would work. If
Yeah.
that's something that's a thought.
And access to 110 bikes would be pretty sweet for a bicycle thief.
On Loggers Lane instead of Cleveland, where it's maybe going to see some other eyes and sort of raise some attention. So,
Yeah.
question I had. And then, one last question, just through this screening, would the vehicles in the parkade be visible? Is that sort of depending on the angle?
Yeah,
or the-
it'll depend on the angle. But with all of the screening, the intent is to do full mock-ups, to check that kind of thing, to check that kind of thing, also to check, what wind does to it and that kind of thing. So it's something that's still in development, but the intent is, yeah, it's a screen from the street on a low angle. You probably won't be able to see in there, maybe from a residential unit at the same level.
Yeah.
You might be able to see, veiled behind. You would be able to see the parquet, I think.
And then one other thing that reminded me of is the amenity space on the ceiling or the roof. Wondering about wind and sort of wind protection for people up there, if that was something that was considered, the sound being notoriously windy.
Sorry, for which one, or for all of them?
Kind of
The
over,
rooftop?
yeah, rooftop, especially for the civic building.
We were kind of thinking about or looking at the city screen, kind of screen structure, like wood sort of spaced, that helps to break up that space, but now that you mention it, it would help to break the wind so you could tuck yourself behind it.
Yeah.
When I had those on, mostly kind of to give the space some structure, so it wasn't just one open area.
Yeah.
I could see that it could help with that function as well.
You find that in Squamish, it's windy, and you're not stopping the wind. Even on the kind of the local, any of the outdoor spaces where you sit and you're in the direct wind, you need a pretty significant, 6-foot-high glass thing across, and then you need to sit behind it.
Well, we're
It's not
thinking-
affected by the wind.
Wouldn't be a total wind barrier, it would help.
It disrupts it.
Disrupt it, make it a little bit more comfortable. Yep, that's all for me, thank you.
Yeah, just two quick questions. Is it a phased development? Is it phased or is it built all at the same time?
I think there's the potential for it to be phased. That hasn't been decided now. It kind of depends obviously what the market's doing at the time. And, we get to that point, but potentially it could be phased to, the north chunk and the south piece split up by the central plaza.
Okay. Yeah, and then the Main Street Plaza, is that land the developers to push towards the pavilion, or how is that dealt with? There's landscaping showing going up to the pavilion, but it looks like the African slot stops.
So the lot actually, there's the property line.
Yeah.
Where the cursor is. So this is actually the road right of way. That's the Main Street right of way.
Yeah.
And it's the district early on, council early on identified that was an opportunity to make something much better of that piece of road than just.
So it's like a developer contribution to be able to push across.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a joint thing, so the developer's charged with designing and building it, but that's kind of overseeing and directing it, and then the maintenance would likely be in the district's hand afterwards, but it's very much like a joint project where we need to coordinate together on it, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, all my other questions were answered. Thanks.
So along the Cleveland storefront, it looks to me in the soffit that there's lights embedded there, is it light strips, is that
That's right.
the case?
Yeah, like a flush LED light strip.
Very cool, okay. Also along that length of the building, is there seating planned? I don't really see it in the landscape diagram, but would we be continuing what's happened further up Cleveland as far as seating along?
I don't think we have that
Cleveland.
contemplated at the point. I think there's one bench right there.
Well, there's a few,
Oh yeah, there are a few.
there's some.
There are some, I'm just looking at the image on the front of your revised diagram. So.
Yeah, there'll be some in the, in that
By the
landscape
entrance,
buffer.
entrance here, there's some in here, in between some of the landscaping.
Okay, great.
So that's the way, as I understand it, the way the streetscape is designed, that there's like a little zone in between the street and the sidewalk area that can then be inhabited in different ways, so either
Yeah.
with a tree or with that landscape planting or with the furniture. So there's a degree of flexibility.
Yeah,
Um,
but
We
you're,
could
you're
use-
proposing to
Yeah.
put some in along
Mhm.
there, yeah.
And the bike racks, the bike rack park that was added up right up in here, to the far south end.
Yeah. I see.
And the other ones that were added down here and against the entryway, there's some in here, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. On this metal material, now when you go to a darker color, is that a powder coating or or is the metal itself dark or
No, it would be coated.
it would be coated? Okay, so there is an opportunity for any color, basically.
Eventually.
Yeah, yeah. I also am curious, in reading through the documents here, I see a relaxation of 41 parking stalls. Is that correct?
I can clarify that. So we have our parking cash and lieu, so you can buy out commercial parking stalls. So the proponent's proposing to buy out 39 of the required commercial parking spaces, and that's in line with how our bylaw is structured.
And so where is that parking taken care of? 39
Well,
missing,
in
39 missing
theory,
stalls.
that money goes to a district fund that can be used to build a parkade structure that's located some other place downtown.
It says 41 here.
Okay,
Yeah, my calculation is 39. Let's just call it 40, and we need to figure it out. Yeah.
$70,000 there.
okay, I'll have a comment around that in our next, another question?
If you may.
Sure, yeah.
Just a couple of questions. What's the distance between the office building and the northern building? Grid line 14 and 20. How much distance do we have?
Let's see.
Roughly
Well, it's at least 35 feet.
35?
Yeah.
And
Offhand,
I
but-
can see on this, I can't see that. There is no dimension.
Yeah, it's in the order of 35 feet.
35 feet.
Car colony.
And I can see that in the south elevation of the office building, there are some windows there. You have windows from office to the residential.
Yeah.
And how does the office access to this deck?
Yeah, so when the office gets laid out, there will be presumably at
No,
the,
it doesn't show in the plan.
Yeah,
You'll do
yeah.
it later.
yeah.
I see.
So where the, in that plan where you have that kind of yellow
Yeah, I
bar
have a
that
level
joins the
3.
core.
Yeah, I have level
A level
3, but
three.
it doesn't
You
show.
just continue.
Right. Okay. Thank you, John.
Do you want to continue on with comments? We'll keep going this way around.
Well, it's a very extensive and big project because that's my first time. I guess you guys have seen it before. Overall, I think it's a nice project, good project. I'm sure they have spent a lot of time. I wish there was a better, they mentioned language between the residential and office. They are two totally different languages. I don't think they can talk to each other, these two different languages. I wish there was some kind of a more connection visually between this. Seems like two different architects designed it without really knowing each other. Basically, as you mentioned, parking, 41 parking or 39 parking is something that, well, I'm sure the contribution will be appreciated, but it needs to be somehow addressed, that how this 41 parking will be addressed, because there may be shortage of parking. It's a huge 200 units plus 40,000 square feet of commercial. So that's another issue to me. But other than that, I think it's a good project.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, again, thank you very much for the presentation. There's a lot going on, for sure. I think my main comment is just that I kind of feel like there could be more covered space on the upper decks. They're quite substantial in size, and I think, in the warmer months when we do still get a ton of rain, there might be a lot of people crowded under a very small area where those harvest tables are, and perhaps you guys could cover a bit more than just allow people up there. But other than that, I think it's a pretty unique, beautiful building. Thank you very much.
All right, yeah, thanks again. I'll have a comment on the width of the Main Street Plaza. I think that's a major safety hazard to have a 7-meter driveway. If you're trying to create a pedestrian-friendly environment, I think that's something that should be pushed back
Yeah,
on.
I'll add one comment to that, is that we are still in the middle, this is still
Yeah.
early days for the design of this, and one thing that staff are considering is a chicane
Yeah.
to slow down speeds and force that speed control. So that's something that we're very seriously considering.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, speaking back to parking as well, I think that if you're removing sort of parking requirements, that offsetting that and thinking that hopefully will lead to more people walking and biking, more needs to be done to provide additional bike racks. I think that moving some to be in covered locations is great, but just sort of a quick glance on the plans, there's probably less than 40 parking spaces for bikes other than the resident parking. I think that's something that could be considered. Yeah, I really like the plazas in general. I think that's a great way to make the space engaging and interesting and brings people to those storefronts and hopefully creates an environment that's comfortable and safe for everyone. And so I think that considering even people with low visibility or mobility challenges, I think that there's extra considerations where there's not a curb, and that's something that, once again, for the Main Street Plaza, probably as you guys continue, something that should be looked at in a little bit more detail, and same ensuring clear walk aisles. I know the mid-block plaza, it looked as though the pedestrian lane has a bit of a chicane. Just sort of thinking if people can't see or have low vision, there's potential tripping hazards and risks there. Yeah, overall that's it for me.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic project. Super interesting modulation and mixture of all the volumes, and it's also great to see so much explanation in a package as well. You know, it's good to see all the diagrams and everything. I think 99% of the DPA objectives have been met, and in most cases exceeded. I think I have two small reservations. One being that DPA 3 is asking for a distinctive architecture, and I'm just ever so slightly worried that this palette seems to be replicated a lot around town, the sort of 3 or 4 colors, and then that the distinct and unique nature of these buildings might start to be diminished, especially as there's just so many. One springs to mind is the Sirocco, and that's just 3 the same palette, and now we're going to have this at the end, which is a similar sort of palette. And I think that I really love the office building and that being so distinct, so I can slightly disagree with you, but that's just 2 architects, right? We always disagree. So I thought there might be another opportunity just to make that even more unique, so that it did look like more separate buildings. But then again, that's opposite of what someone else has said here. So, and then the second is just the DPA 5.2 is preserving the historic high street. I always think that's a tough one to do because there's not a ton of great historic examples in town for us to pull from. The only reservation I would then have is just the basalt arches. Whilst I love that material, they are very large and sort of heavy and rectilinear, which I don't think would be hard to kind of prove that had real, other than the material, where that was elsewhere around town historically. But I totally recognize it's really hard to sort of tie that together. but I do like this human scale at the lower floor. Would possibly like to see a little bit more seating along Cleveland. I see that there's a couple of little benches, but with so much street animation along there. One of the, I think Zephyr's really works with that little planter with the 2 seats, and there's always people sitting there, so there's hundreds of feet here for maybe that to happen. Yeah, but it's a fantastic project and it's going to be a great addition. Last comment would just be for staff is that there's been a lot of material and notes about this, but maybe it would be great to have those minutes in our packages, because I wasn't here for rezoning or for all the 3 years of work these guys have done before, so I
Yeah,
have no
and
context.
to speak to that, we actually don't have the minutes, and that was more of a procedural thing where they were brought in formally, so there's no formal motion, and it was just at kind of our discretion to have ADP look at it early, so there wasn't actually minutes, just video that was recorded for that, but
Yeah.
I did go back and try to pull them, so.
Oh, and
We
that's totally fine.
we're endeavoring to keep minutes for rezoning
Yeah,
things now.
cool.
Thanks. I'm going to start with, on the retail level, I didn't ask the question, but I've asked this in previous projects and pointed it out. There definitely needs to be access to the rear of the retail units. And I know this from firsthand experience. It seems to be we're getting a lot of designs because of the nature of our floodplain, and we're getting parking up higher into the building. So we've got parkades like this, and then retail onto it, and then there's not really any penetrations planned for there into. We don't know how the CRUs will be joined, obviously. You've got sort of like what may happen there, and there's washrooms and whatnot, but and I'm not even sure about the technical possibility of having an entry into the back of, let's say, a coffee shop. So, but where does that corridor join onto? Because as I'm looking here, I see what looks like some fire exit corridors, which you obviously can't go into. Or maybe you can, but that's a question. And then where do they come out? Do they come out into the lobby, or is there a place for you to come out into the parkade? And then if you can get into the parkade, great, because then you can get over to the garbage and recycling, which is a whole other logistic that really should be thought out well for retail operations, particularly if they have a restaurant. So in the absence of sort of a clear picture of how that can work right now, it just would be a very strong suggestion that is something that you take into account and make that work. Otherwise, you'll find some really big difficulties, or you may not ever be able to lease certain premises in there, because Starbucks, for example, needs a back door, and they won't lease unless you have one. So that's the comment. I'm going to talk about color for a second. I completely agree with David and his commentary. My thought was, and I really want to compliment you because I think it's a wonderful project. I think it looks great. So many aspects of the design. I feel that the basalt around the retail looks heavy to me, or will look heavy. And it could be partly because of the width of the band that goes around, or it could also be the color. So if you're going with as dark a color as you have on basalt, and we saw the sample, I'm not sure if there's a way of either narrowing that band or making the stone finish a lighter color. And the same I could say for the perforated metal. If you go to a black, maybe you could think of a lighter gray or something like that. Or that's just my suggestion on what might feel a little bit better as far as the heaviness onto the street. But I actually really like what you've done on the street level itself and underneath the soffit. It looks really great. I think that would work really well. And then my comment on parking, I'm going to reiterate, I can't be any more adamant towards council. I actually think it's the commercial parking that we should be protecting fully. as in no parking in lieu for commercial. And the reason for that is we'll end up hamstringing the commercial operations and the commercial viability of these retail units if people cannot come and park. I already don't shop downtown because of the parking scenario in Squamish right now, and I literally know many people that feel the same way. Unfortunately, we end up going to places like Walmart because they got tons of parking, and I feel bad every time I do it. But it's a factor, it really is. I know the wish is to have everyone riding bikes and all that kind of stuff. And I actually agree, I would agree with the notion that office staff should be the first people that should try not to drive downtown, because if they're gonna be in the office all day anyway, take the bus, you know, carpool, whatever. But if you've got a whole bunch of retail, the viability of retail depends upon accessibility and convenience. And having to drive 5 times around the block or park 3 blocks away can kill a business. And I know this from years of experience in Gastown and Yaletown and Broadway, for example. So that's my rather strong comment at the end there. And does anyone else have anything else they want to say?
Just maybe one small thing. Is the awning continuous all around the building? I mean, the office building I know is recessed, but the rest of the residential, the awning is continuous or it breaks?
Sorry, on
The
the,
overhang.
on the,
At the commercial?
Yeah, no, then residential. I couldn't see that. Is it continuous? I mean, it shows here that it's continuous, is it?
On the ground level? Or
Yes.
Yeah,
oh yeah,
overhang on the ground level.
Is it continuous all around?
yeah, I mean, it's broken into pieces, but it's, each of the storefronts have,
But
have
there is
overhang.
gap between them or it's?
Currently, there is a
Yeah,
gap
that's
where the basalt posts are.
Yeah.
Is there any bylaw that we had to have?
It's a guideline
Yeah.
about having weather protection.
Continuous.
This has been, we've debated this for other projects, and if it's mostly continuous, then we're satisfied, particularly as often architects will use it to kind of delineate the unit or to kind of add that definition. So, yeah. I would say staff is satisfied with how much awning has been provided at this stage.
Okay, that's it for comments. We go to recommendation. Any thoughts from the panel on recommendations? I can read them out if you like. Recommendation A is that the advisory design panel supports the project and does not need to see this project return. B is that the advisory design panel supports the project in general and would like this applicant to work with staff to resolve certain recommendations that we would outline. C is that the advisory design panel supports the project in general and would like the applicant to resolve the following and return to present again. And D is that advisory design panel does not support.
Are there any strong recommendations? Parking? Is that something?
Yeah, I would think B would be appropriate for the project. Leave it to staff to work on certain recommendations. Okay, so we will have a motion for B. As in, David to second. All in favor? Against?
Do you want to recap the recommendations, or you can quickly read my notes, or
I'm absolutely. Yeah.
obviously parking,
Mhm.
covered spaces, perhaps increasing the amount, and a review of the color palette to reduce kind of the heaviness and or the similarities to other buildings around town and just provide some more interest there. Yeah. Those are the 3 main ones I kind of
Yeah.
heard from you guys.
Perhaps the seating on Cleveland. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute
Yeah.
break. Okay, welcome back to Advisory Design Panel. Our next item of business is 40480 Tantalus Road. And we'll hand over to our Asia.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'll make this one short and sweet. So this project is in for rezoning. It has not gone to council for any readings, so this is a really early look. And we wanted to bring it to the design panel because it's a fairly significant proposal, and they've requested a CD zone, a comprehensive development zone, so that essentially leaves us to customize the zone, which will dictate the overall siting and massing and height, essentially the building envelope. So it's a great opportunity at this stage to really kind of set some of the major parameters for what the development might look like. So we wanted to get ADP's feedback around that in relation to the specific context of this site. And I won't go into too many details. It falls under both Development Permit Area 3, so the same one that we were reviewing with the last project, as well as Development Permit Area 8, which is related to the Highway 99 corridor, and whose guidelines really just speak to making it look nice and having landscaping adjacent to the highway, so when people drive by they think highly of Squamish. That's essentially that development permit area. There's a few interesting constraints to the site. The property to the north at 1880 is partially in the agricultural land reserve, and we've talked to the applicant about doing a more significant setback from that property to the north in order to facilitate continued agricultural purposes. And then obviously we've got the corridor trail running parallel to the highway. And so we've also discussed having a strong kind of connection to the site as well as to Tantalus Road from that corridor trail. And then the other important element to note is that the rezoning is only explicitly for the west side of the road. It's actually a hooked parcel, so in the map up here you can see it's labeled future phases. That's not under consideration under this particular application. So we're only focusing on the west side of the site. And I think that's about all I wanted to highlight for the panel, and I'm going to pass it on to the applicant's architect.
Thanks, Aja. Hi, my name's Justin Bennett with Urban West Architecture. Just run through the site. So, like Aja mentioned, our site's along Tantalus Road, just north of Garibaldi Way, and on the eastern edge of the Highway 99. This is the first phase of the project. Potential future phases down the road may occur. The main vehicle access to the site is probably going to be through the intersection of Garibaldi Way and 99 and up into Tantalus. There's the existing pedestrian and cyclist corridors are running north-south, and like Aja mentioned, we're making a connector through there in the sort of the dashed red line through our site, which will help activate the commercial spaces that we'll be proposing, as well as kind of connecting to the existing community. So that access path creates a natural division for us to potentially break our project into two buildings. And then we're looking at access for parking occurring along the northern edge of the property line, as that's up against ALR land, and there's a 15-meter setback on the northern edge, so it kind of becomes a natural place to bring vehicles through. And our open site area is proposed up against Highway 99 and the pedestrian and cyclist corridor. So the adjacent context to the north is the agricultural land, where our 15-meter setback is. Garibaldi Estates neighbor boards on the north as well. To the south, there's the Squamish Fire Hall, and just to the south of that is the Spectacle and mixed-use commercial building. It's about 4 stories with a similar program to our building. Site plan here, so access along the northern edge. We are going to be providing approximately 228 spaces of surface parking total. 60% of that, which is planned to be located at grade, uncovered, and the remaining 40 will be underneath the building. So underneath the two orange volumes are a proposed commercial space at street level.
Sorry, I didn't get, how many parkings is it?
228 spaces are proposed.
And how many outside?
There are the exact numbers around,
Roughly.
let's say 60% of those, whatever that is.
Okay.
And we're looking, we are, so for commercial spaces, we're required 44 spaces and we're proposing 62, which includes some spaces along the edge of Tantalus, some parallel spaces there. So we're providing a little bit more than what we're required to in case the use changes from commercial to restaurant, in which case we would need additional parking to support that use. And for the residential component, we're looking for potential relaxation to provide one-to-one parking, so one parking space for every one residential unit. And also potentially looking at supplementing that with some car share spaces as well. So, our proposed building is 8 stories. We've got, if you look at the section diagram there in the bottom corner, we've got 1 level of parking, 1 level of commercial, and 6 stories of purpose-built rental housing, 100% purpose-built rental. To deal with that building height, we've looked at a number of strategies. I think the first one is we've looked at potentially setting back that massing, like several layers of setbacks. The first one being off of Tantalus, the 4.5 meter setback, which goes to the edge of the below grade parking. Then an additional setback of about 10 meters or so that goes to the face of the commercial, and then an additional couple meters to the edge of the residential component itself. If you look at the top sort of axonometric diagram, we're proposing sort of a 6% slope on either end of Tantalus in here that sort of crests at the top. And the reason for that is so that we could make a better connection to the commercial space. We don't have any steps or ramps that occurs right off of Tantalus, so better for the commercial tenants, and also maybe a bit of an improvement for wheelchair accessibility as well. So in terms of, this is the shadow study on the 8-story massing. For the most part, most of the shadowing occurs on our own site. In the winter months, there is some overshadowing on the ALR land to the north. I think for the most part, it's primarily on our own site. To our preliminary floor plans. On the left are underground parking with a dedicated course serving each of the buildings. The middle plan is our commercial level with residential entries located facing Tantalus in the center of each building. We're considering potentially maybe locating those entrances within this pedestrian breezeway so that we have a larger, more contiguous commercial space. The configuration right now sort of chops it off into several commercial spaces, so that might be something we want to explore as we continue. And the upper floor is our typical residential floor, which is fairly conceptual right now, but it's really a large mix of rental units ranging from studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. here's a view along Tantalus Road. Again, the kind of the exterior materiality is conceptual at this point. We haven't really gone too far in that. You know, I'm looking at a basic look at openings and massing. But we'll draw your attention just to the sort of stepping of the massing. Like this is, you can kind of see how Tantalus is sloped up 6% so that you can walk in, you know, at grade at the commercial level. And then our commercial level is set, commercial spaces are set back additional, and then again, our buildings are also set back beyond that. So a view from Tantalus, kind of looking through that pedestrian breezeway. And then it's the view sort of back, with your back to Highway 99, where the cyclist and pedestrian path would be looking at the building. And that's all I've got right now.
I just have one question quickly.
Okay.
Your commercial is only CRU, no office, right?
Correct.
And that's why you had more parking calculations, so you can anticipate for restaurant.
Potentially, yeah. I think the uses haven't been, we allowed for additional spaces in case a large restaurant, some restaurants took over those spaces, then we would have a little bit of extra there for that.
Okay. And it's going to be a wood frame over concrete?
It'll be a concrete construction up to
Second
this
floor.
level, second floor there, the top, and then 6 stories of wood frame on top.
Wood frame.
Okay, I think we'll we'll start with David for questions and on the table that way.
So I'm to understand you're not allowed to do anything in adjacent to the highway in terms of building
Power lines.
power lines.
It's a hydro right of way, kind of goes through the center of that area.
Okay. Second question, are you allowed to raise Tantalus Road?
We're working on that right now. From a
Because
flood,
if everyone does that.
It's line of sight thing.
Yeah.
At least preliminarily, I don't think that many of our internal departments are on board with what's being proposed, so I could imagine that it might be something resembling more what Spectacle Building is, where it's a terracing up to the podium level.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about that.
We haven't
Sorry,
talked about
just hit you with that in the middle of the meeting.
It'd
It's a
come
nice
up.
idea.
Yeah.
I apologize, I had the previous meeting, I had to leave, so
Okay.
Thank you, Farzan.
thank you.
Thank you. See you later.
So because this is not a formal consideration, we don't have quorum anymore, just so you guys are aware, so we can't pass any motions. But we weren't really anticipating to do that anyway, so I think that's totally fine to just keep going with your comments and
The comments and suggestions will still be recorded, so,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had a question, how are you planning on treating if you do raise the whole building up on this podium, you've got kind of like 10-foot drops on either side, you know, the south and the north.
Correct. We would. I mean, you can kind of see the drops right here already occurring. So we would need to integrate some terracing to deal with that if
Yeah.
we're able to slope this. Yeah, some ramping.
Okay. And had you considered differentiating the buildings a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have considered, I guess, until we had sort of nailed down our unit mix and potentially what that might look like. That it is something that we could look at.
Yeah. And then the unit mix seems to be predominantly sort of one beds. Has there been?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of one. It's a mix of the blues are the twos, so twos and purples are threes. So it's kind of a mix of
Yeah,
of all of them. I guess the majority of the units are one beds.
So there's 48 studios and 72 one beds.
And that's still being, I think, considered. I think
Yeah.
it depends what the market's like at that time.
Yeah. I don't have any other questions, just I'll leave it to comments.
I have a question about the pedestrian and bike access down the back. So the slope on Tantalus Road would only be on Tantalus Road and not the parking area behind?
Correct, that was the idea, where that would just be Tantalus Road.
Okay. And any sort of, I guess, accessible pedestrian and bike access, terracing?
Yeah, on the back of the building, where the parking lot side, we would need there's a ramp plan for either end of that raised podium.
Okay,
To
it's showing,
bring bikes up, yeah.
where it's showing stairs.
Yeah, is there some ramps? There's a ramp right by the stair there in the middle.
Okay.
No,
yeah.
notionally sort of
Yeah.
shown, yeah.
And then just a question, is there enough space outside of this hydro right of way for like, trees or something to break up the site from the highway?
Mhm.
Is that something that had been looked at or considered?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of showing some trees there, some landscaping on there, it's kind of,
But more like
I mean,
continuous?
Oh, I
the
get it.
stat the hydrostat right-of-way agreement will dictate what you can and can't plant where.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll have to take a look at that when we get to the
Yeah.
time of DP.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's usually quite limited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's it for me.
I don't have a ton of questions. Are the two buildings exactly the same?
currently they are, their version of it.
Yeah, that's it for me.
Okay. Is there a plan for a sub-area plan in and around Garibaldi that would include?
Not for that this site falls within. So the land use designation from the current OCP is for mixed commercial. It's basically one of the sites that's been earmarked to accommodate a lot of future density, given its proximity to transit and amenities and shopping. So through just the land use designation in the OCP, really, it's been kind of designated that we do want to see something fairly significant on this site.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't set a height, it doesn't set a density. It just says, like, this site is expected to accommodate, like, be one of the main infill sites to accommodate growth in Squamish.
Yeah. It would be nice to see it come through in conjunction with what's planned generally for the other side of the street. So that's part of my question. And how about the traffic issues on Tantalus? Because I know everyone is going to ask that question.
Yeah, so both the district and the Ministry of Transportation are coordinating on terms of reference for a traffic impact study. It will likely simply build on the study that was done for Garibaldi Springs. And it wouldn't incorporate whatever might be being thought of for the east property, because that's a total unknown and outside of the scope of this application. So it would just be for this, what's being proposed currently.
Can we see a traffic study for this?
Council will see that before they consider the rezone, yeah, as part of the rezoning process, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I'm going to, yeah, that's it for questions, so I guess we'll,
I have one more question. What is the applicant requesting in terms of height for the CD?
8 stories.
But no meter, no
Yeah,
dimension?
28 meters, which is 93 feet. So similar height to the project that we just saw, actually. Yeah. Lots of similarities in the process. We kind of brought that project early a couple times through the rezoning, and then it ended up very fully formed for the development permit part, and that's a similar process that we would like this project to go through. So it's the kind of the early days here to to kind of shape the box that we want to see.
Yeah.
Obviously, totally different environment from the downtown.
Yeah, much different context.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Do you want to make some comments?
Yeah. Well, it's really good to see projects in such early stages. Really great. I would maybe consider the sound buffer or some screening between that and the fire hall. I imagine the fire hall is going to get rebuilt at some point.
If it stays there.
Asterix, yeah. So, you know, doing a studio 1 floor across from the fire hall. I would maybe consider small changes to the buildings to sort of set them apart. But I like the overall sort of form and the uniqueness of them, which DPA 3 talks about. Considering like moving the setback, you know, from the ALR land, I think is good, but maybe there's another way you can differentiate the buildings by mixing the heights. Now I know the developer's going to hate you if you remove 1 floor from that north building, but if there is height requirements, maybe you could add another floor to the south building, or half floors, because the upper floor there could have a deck out to the north on the upper floor, and then that just gives a little bit more of a, you know, difference to the height there. Yeah, and it looks very kind of space agey materials at the moment, so maybe just, I know people really like the kind of the local materials, and so maybe there's some way to kind of blend that in.
I will also just add that, I mean, right now the building is trying to be as efficient as it can for purpose-built rental with the single story of the commercial concrete and then 6 stories of wood frame on top, which is the maximum that we can go with wood frame. So right now it's sort of in a sweet spot for building as much rental housing as we can without going to concrete construction or going higher on one side.
So didn't the BC just change to 12 stories of timber construction?
For heavy timber.
We're doing CLT.
Yeah, which is just like building concrete, so it wouldn't make it any more.
Yeah. It'd be a selling point.
What's that?
It'd be a selling point.
Yeah.
One of the buildings CLT. Yeah.
Maybe if you build 12,
Rent down.
maybe if you build 12
It's all
stories.
about keeping the cost down so the rent.
Yeah.
If you're
The
gonna
rents
make
don't go
comments,
down,
you
the
have to
rents
come up
stay
with
at market.
Yeah.
But
No
we're on the
worries.
Are
record.
you allowed to sit at the table?
They can sit at the table, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Rent, yeah, target homes. Yeah, we definitely think about all of the factors you're talking about. And this facade is just putty in our hands right now, and we want to hear comments back, very valid about natural materials, things like that, but we are keeping an eye to costs.
If I could just counter that slightly, I would also just say that, you know, stick frame is very cost effective, but has problems with the other, you know, trades you have to bring in to complete all of that. If you do something like CLT, you also build in like the resonance of the sound between units, and especially in rental units. Trying to get an STC 50 between a stick frame house is very difficult to achieve. So building with mass timber and stuff. So, but it's just, yeah. Lots of other buildings in Squamish are kind of going towards that. So it's
Yeah, we actually are
We're doing
doing the first CLT building right now. We're just breaking ground like next week.
there you go.
So
Great.
we're doing it just on one level, kind of, so we understand how the process works with this CLT provider.
Yeah.
It's kind of baby steps, but I mean, there is potential to go that way, but this way we'll have an idea of the process. And actually trying to find the trades for the CLT has been kind of a problem,
Yeah.
because no one's up here has done it.
Yeah.
And this is only on like 7,000 square feet of CLT, so someone on this scale might be, but you know, we're still a ways off from breaking ground. So.
It's an option.
Oh,
For
totally.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's all good.
Because I kind of like the idea, but I'm not sure if it's
Certain people don't do it yet. I'm wondering why.
wondering
right?
why,
Like,
yeah.
Bose is not doing it, Polygon's not doing it. Why? So we'll probably find out why in this first
In the
project.
next 6 months.
Okay. Cool. There's no comments.
Yeah, comment about the change of grade on the road. 6% is not an accessible grade based off tax standards. So for people in wheelchairs, it's actually not a good solution.
Right. It's like 1 in 12.
Yeah, 5% is the limit if you don't have rest spaces. So.
Part of that was to slow the traffic down too. This is a crazy, everyone drives so quickly through here traffic calming would be quite nice.
Yeah, lots of
People
other
drive
ways,
across.
lots of other ways to traffic calm
Oh, for
without,
sure.
without having a,
We also have a floodplain that we're trying to deal with, so.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely be looking at traffic calming opportunities along that stretch.
Yeah. And like the rendering on here showing a center median, something like that, can have a traffic calming impact. Yeah. But that's really my only comment, is that I think that needs some more thought.
And we did run it by engineering, and they are okay with it in principle, like it can be done, it's a matter of like, do we want to do it?
Yeah.
So it's not going to affect any flows for like floods, or, you know, we can put that amount of material on, it's not going to impact any of the infrastructure underneath. So it is feasible.
It's a conceptual.
Yeah, it's a cool idea too.
It's how do we make this retail more valuable and accessible to the public? Like when you're driving by, wait till you see some of the commercial we have to build on government. It's 11 feet off the sea. You're not going to know what's there.
So the other idea was, with the breezeway coming through, having that at the height, you can actually walk to eventually the other side, so it all kind of pulls the whole thing together. Rather than going upstairs and
Totally
downstairs,
accessible.
and cross some traffic, up again.
Takes the
trying to
ramps.
Create kind of create a high street there
Right?
in a.
Literally.
But anyway, that was the concept, and it's still being worked through.
Yeah, that's it.
Thanks.
It's unique looking. Yeah, I understand like the exterior shape, like the rendering is obviously, like you said, like putty in your hands, and that you haven't really married to anything. It's completely open for interpretation and moving forward with it. But yeah, I can't really think of anything in Squamish that looks like it. So it's definitely unique looking. But yeah, I appreciate you guys bringing this to us this early. I think that's really all I have to comment on.
I guess my first inclination is just, it looks like a city building being kind of put in the middle of, so I'm not really sure all that much relates to Squamish or what you really want to see as you're driving by Squamish on the highway, but as you say, it's putty in your hands right now. Hopefully you'll take some feedback and sort of find the Squamish vernacular. People still complain about spectacle because I don't think they were anywhere close to the Squamish vernacular. It was a long time ago. But David, can you pass me that? I did bring in, we had a project come through here that it's at Tantalus and Dowd. And it just is a wonderful project. It really fits the neighborhood well, and hopefully you guys will be receptive to you know, something like that that really kind of fits with what's going on down there.
They don't call for the density on that particular location.
Yeah, I think you could with the finishes. I mean, it's not, you know, it's dressing.
Is that for sale or rental?
This is a sale. Yeah,
Or-
yeah, yeah. It has a commercial component and whatnot as well, but
You're talking about the finish?
just
Okay.
the you know, wood, rock, you know.
So the yellow is actually, don't worry, we're not even, we're working.
Yeah,
on it.
I mean, there's no
But
end
I
of
definitely want
there's
some
no end of
natural
complaints about Scirocco and just the fact that we're seeing what you would call ferry boats all over town now.
Totally.
So
That was in comments
so
10 years ago.
yeah,
It's going to
yeah.
look like a BC ferry across the water.
So when people are seeing what they're seeing right now, which they're looking at it, we can just say, look, this is putty in your hands. You can still do something. I like the idea that maybe some varying heights or whatnot, and that's just a comment that I think you'll probably find from a lot of people. I have a lot of firsthand experience with the commercial that happened at Spectacle. Absolutely against, or recommending against any kind of thought that the highway side commercial works. It
No,
works
I
for
really-
offices.
no, for sure. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
there.
terrible failure, that one. But I like your idea where you would allow it to be deeper, because really what you're gonna get is people on Tantalus. And if you've got a deep, yoga studios can be all the way back and still connect and that sort of thing. So you're probably on the right track there with the housing being accessed from the middle walkway.
Situation in the commercial that.
Yeah.
And we've watched,
Super challenging, yeah.
people moving in and out of there.
You
Yeah.
can tell by the lease, the tenants,
Yeah,
how well things work.
yeah,
That's a challenge for sure.
yeah. But it'll be interesting to see what you do across the street as well, and if somehow that can just give us a preview or whatever, that would
And
be
we have
wonderful.
we're working on the environmental
Yeah.
components right now, so we
Yeah.
really have no idea what we're working with.
Yeah.
In terms of phase 2. So.
But it's such a great opportunity, because when you see the housing that's all around it, you can see opportunity for some kind of connection, park, sort
For
of
sure.
green space in between, and
It
it
actually
can be,
connects up to Good Park. There's a,
yeah, so that side actually has a lot more opportunity than the one you're looking at right now, and it's for obvious reasons, but it'll be nice to see how they can connect and work together.
for
So,
sure.
yeah,
It may help even rationalize that building form if there was even some massing that showed heights rising up to it, or a path that connected with the break between the buildings or
Mhm.
something. Because right now I think people will just,
Yeah, for sure.
it's just landed, boom, and
Yeah.
it's gonna look awesome once everything else is done, but
yeah.
We could
some visualization.
show
would be
something, but
quite
it wouldn't be part of the application, just we don't exactly know.
And someone
We'll
just built
continue
a
that
single-family home right next door, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, your ALR land actually has quite a large house in that corner.
It's actually
Yeah.
only half of that's ALR. ALR where the house is, and actually the house is right next to the horse
Yeah.
barn,
Yeah.
whatever it is. It's a pretty weird place to put a house.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the part under the power lines is not ALR, it's commercial.
yeah, yeah. So you've got your driveway through there, so that's gonna give you some separation.
Yeah.
and whatnot, so. Yeah. Any other comments from anyone? Any other discussion? No? So since we have no quorum at the moment, we're not going to be moving for any sort of recommendation on this, and that the comments will be recorded as
Yep.
we've discussed, and that will be that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I don't know if we do a motion to close the meeting, let's just do one just in case, but I think when Farzan left, that was kind of.
That
like-
closes the formal
I would
part?
have to check with legislative services, but let's just do one just in case, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Move to terminate. David?
Yeah.
Brent, seconds. All in favor? Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah, cheers.